Oh,
On behalf of Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial, I'm Ryan Szymanski, and today it is my pleasure to introduce author John Miano, who has been a volunteer here at Battleship New Jersey for over 3 years, almost 4 years at this point, right?
Yeah.
We started right around the same time. There are a ton of books out there you can buy that cover the anatomy of various warships. But as far as I know, John is the first person to actually go through all of the extant blueprints for Iowa-class battleships to put one of these works together. And so his book, A Visual Tour of Battleship New Jersey, is the most detailed and accurate book on the construction and design features of Iowa-class battleships that has ever been created, and it's an absolute must-have for any World War II history buffs or Iowa-class battleship aficionados. So, without any further ado, please welcome me in joining John Miano.
hey, thanks, Ryan. Well, the topic for today, we're going to be talking about features of the battleship that you can see on the tour. The book itself covers features throughout the entire ship, but I thought that since we're all here and we would just, for the book, we'd focus on things that everyone can just see when they visit Battleship New Jersey. Now, the reason I wrote this book was that I've been doing research on the ship for many years and then started coming here 4 years ago. And what I found was there was virtually no information available on the structure of the ship and how it was put together. There are a lot of good books on the history of the Iowa class, like Stilwell's books. There are books on the history of how the ship was designed, like Friedman's books, that are all very good. But as far as the ship, how it's put together, there's not a lot there. And I was kind of fascinated by the types of details that show up on USS New Jersey's YouTube channel all the time. There's not a time when I visit the ship and don't find some new detail I've never noticed before about the ship's construction. So I highly recommend watching the YouTube channel. I know the people here are already on, but I would recommend you spread the word to your friends to look at it as well. But in addition to the lack of information, one of my frustrations was bad information. And I'm going to give you an example here. This was sent to me by someone during an internet discussion. It's a picture from a book, and the book shows USS New Jersey, but it claims to show USS New Jersey. But I've circled a few errors, and I call these errors because these are features that you would see on Iowa-class battleships, but you wouldn't see on the USS New Jersey in the 80s. So a lot of battleship fans would notice these. But what I want to do is focus on the cutaway. Okay, here is a cutaway diagram from the USS New Jersey from the book, and I don't know what this is. I mean, quite frankly, I've been on the ship, explored the ship, and it doesn't look anything like this. And so, let me illustrate. This is what I thought it would look like from the plans. If I cut it away, took away the shell like you see in that previous diagram, you'd see torpedo bulkheads, which are in green, and a bunch of frames blocking it, supplying support. And if I take away the torpedo bulkheads and put these side by side, I'm showing the decks here. So the deck on the right is for a fire room, and you can see that the third deck has a giant hole in it to allow the machinery for the fire room to extend up the second deck, and the engine room to the left has no opening on third deck. The machinery is all below third deck, contrary to what you see in the book. And so what I found is there's a lot of bad information like this, and one of the problems is when you're dealing in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. And so if you just put a slightly, just know slightly more than someone else, you can throw out a lot of bad stuff and no one's going to question it because they're going to assume that you know everything.
John, if you sit in the chair, we can have the computer and you in the same shot.
Okay.
And it makes my life easier. Thank you, John.
You're doing,
Winging this. Okay.
moving. So we're getting there. So I have to put my fingers on here. We're going. But let me show you. One of the things we could do, though, we're exploring the Battleship New Jersey. Here's a picture of Fire Room 2. And you can see in the center of the picture, there's a platform. So just a graded platform that gives access to the machinery, and the boiler is to the right. But you can see the giant hole in third deck where the machinery just passes through. So it kind of looks more like what my diagram than the diagram in the book. So what this illustrates, I think, is that you can show a lot about the structure of the battleship just through photographs. Now it's very trendy in books to have a lot of computer generated images. But this feature of the hole in the deck, you can show right through the book, through a photograph in a book. So the concept and what I was going to do in the book is, after having collected information on New Jersey for, let's say, maybe 20 years now, I was going to do a book to do a brain dump of all this information I've collected to make it public, because it isn't out there. And so chapter 1 of the book was going to be photographs. So I was going to illustrate features, and then in subsequent chapters go and do diagrams and diagrams, 3D images, that kind of thing. But illustrate them first in photographs so you could see them. The problem that I encountered was that chapter 1 grew to over 300 pages. So chapter 1 became volume 1, and that's the book. So now we'll advance to some of the topics that are in the book, but we're going to look at features of USS New Jersey that, if you're a visitor on the ship, you may just walk by and never notice, but things that you might be interesting if you take a look and stop and notice what's going on. So first, this is a diagram that I drew of the hull plating of USS New Jersey. This comes from the original plans, and this diagram might make it into a future book. It's not into the current book, but I'm showing you here to illustrate how the plating is arranged in strakes. You can see that they're long parallel rows of plates, and the plates overlap. Okay, so most of the hull is riveted. So in order for the plates to be riveted, they have to overlap, and those are indicated on the diagram. So we'll start on things you see in the tour. As you board USS New Jersey, you're going to see this. Look over the side, and the strakes that showed in the diagram are clearly visible. What you can't see in the photograph are the rivets, which are flush rivets. But if you are visiting the ship, you can clearly see the rivets in the side of the hull. It's not like Titanic, where they had round-headed rivets on the outside. The rivets are hard. Looking close, you can barely see the rivets. But you also can see is the overlaps in the plating. So the strakes overlap so that they can be riveted. And what you can also see in two places here is that the here, and I say here, the direction of overlap changes. The designers, for some reason, felt that the overlap in the strake should change for reasons that are not clear from the plans. And the other thing you can see above in the upper two strakes are butt plates or gusset plates that are designed to just provide places to rivet where there's nothing behind the plating to hold the rivets. Since these are above the water line where they wouldn't create water resistance, they just added plates on the outside to place the rivets. Now, if you're bored in New Jersey, you can now go all the way to the bow, and you can see the two hawse pipes. If you look to the end of the starboard hawse pipe, you can see there's a little roller button. There's not one on the port side. And so why is one there, and why is there one on one side but not the other? Well, what that does is it's part of a path for a chain that used to run from the roller button. It would come around a winch on the main deck that's a little bit forward of the antenna, and from there it would go down into a pipe into the hull. And at the front, forward end, the chain would go through the bow chock where the current mooring chains are located. Now if you go to a World War II picture, you'll see that chain in place where it goes down and into the water. And then into the water, it goes into the chin at the front forward bow, into a pipe, and then back up to the top. If you see any World War II picture, you'll see a chain dangling into the water at the bow. And these chains were for towing paraveins. Okay, a paravein. Paravein looks like this. So it's like a torpedo with wings. But what would happen with the paravein, you can see the wing to the left is weighted. So the wing would be oriented vertically in the water. And so there'd be a paravein attached to the chain loop that I'm just showing. And the paraveins would swim out because of the wing. It would force the paravein out and on its cable. And if you're going through a minefield, the cable on the paravein would snag the old mines, the cable-based mines, which would then pull them into the cutter, which you can see at the top. And so the cutter would, in theory, snap the mine cable. The mine would float to the surface, and then the gunners, usually the 20-millimeter guns, would shoot the little prongs on the mines to detonate the mine. There's a number of problems with this system. One, it has to work right. If you're actually doing real mines, you're likely to have your paravein blow up because of mine. But you also had to stop the ship to put the paraveins out. You had to stop the ship to pull them back in, and you could only go straight forward while the paraveins were deployed. About in the middle of the Korean War, the Navy decided that it wasn't really a great idea to use battleships as minesweepers, and so the paraveins disappear. This is one of my top 3 silly things that went into battleship design, using battleships as minesweepers. So we'll move a little bit aft to more technical detail for you. This is a close-up picture of the side of turret number 1. You can see that the forward plate is to the left, and the forward side plate is to the right. And you can clearly see that the forward side plate is pockmarked with lots and lots of divots, while the plate on the left from the front is smooth. Now, the reason for this is that the plate on the right has been cemented. Okay? And cementing is the process of adding carbon to the surface of steel. So if you take iron and you add carbon to it, you get steel. And steel is harder than iron, which tends to be relatively soft. And the more the more carbon you add to iron, the harder the resulting steel is. So the problem is that it also becomes brittle. So when you have a projectile coming in, to have the face hard is a desirable attribute for an armor plate, because you would in theory like the shell to impact and on a hard surface and break up and not penetrate. But on the other hand, if your steel is brittle, your armor plate could shatter from the impact as well. So what they designed starting in the late 1800s were methods for face hardening the armor, and so that the outside face was made hard while the inside face remained relatively soft. And in theory, this would give the best of both worlds. And cementing is one of the methods of doing this. What you would do is heat the plate up to several thousand degrees and expose the surface to carbon. And in the U.S., they usually would sit the plate on top of a bed of charcoal and let it absorb the carbon. And they would wrap wet asbestos around the edges to keep the plates from absorbing carbon in other places. The face there are other techniques for face hardening as well. This is what was normally used by most navies. The Japanese used a different system for face hardening plates. The Navy called face hardened plates, no matter how they were face hardened, whether it was cemented or heat treated to face harden, they called them Class A. And the plates that were uniform in hardness, they weren't face hardened, were called Class B. The name suggests that one is preferable to the other, but in reality, the two plates have different. The two types are better in different circumstances. That Class A plates are generally preferable where a projectile hits head on and has a potential to shatter, while Class B plates are better where a projectile might hit at an angle, because it would allow the plate to bend a little and kind of reflect, allow the projectile to bounce off. If a projectile strikes an angle on a face-hardened plate, it's not going to shatter because it's not having the great impact, and it can slide across the plate, causing a huge amount of damage across the surface of the plate. We'll move on. This one is on the turret as well. There's this little ring here. So at the top, the upper part, we have the turret, and below that is the barbette, which is the armor that protects the turret. The turret does not rest upon the barbette, while it gives every appearance of doing so. There's actually only mechanical contact will do it. The round thing that sticks out is the gas seal, which is designed to keep water and, in theory, if there were poison gases, from penetrating the turret. The barbette on the inside is circular, but the thickness varies on the outside, so the outside of the barbette is not strictly circular. So what's going on in that extension is a little blueprint. To the right is the turret part of the barbette, turret part of the gas seal, and to the left is the barbette part of the gas seal. And in the center, see, there's a trough of grease. And so and there's a little, and from the turret, the rotating turret, there's a little angle that sticks into the grease that's clamped down by another piece of metal on top. And so if water comes in, it's got to go up and then through the grease to get in. And the grease is used in marine applications to keep water out, and it also is airtight. And because the distance varies between the turret part is always going to run in a circle, while the barbette part is going to go in and out a little bit, depending on the thickness of the armor. So the little L piece is going to go in and out as the turret revolves. Another little assorted detail. This is from the helipad at the stern. As you can see on the left is how the New Jersey is at the currently painted, and that's actually how it was painted when it was originally in service. At the right is a picture of how the helipad was painted when New Jersey first returned to service in the 1980s. Originally, the helicopters were supposed to approach diagonally off the side and off the starboard side and come diagonally onto the helipad. And the reason for the thinking that is
all guests and crew members are asked to help maintain Battleship New Jersey's heating and air conditioning boundaries by closing all doors behind them when entering and exiting the ship and closing any exterior doors wrapped up when traveling about the ship.
Okay, pardon that interruption. Originally they had the helicopters land diagonally and fit onto the helipad. And the reason that was done was that large helicopters needed to be at an angle in order to fit on the helipad like that. You can see that the helipad is wider than it is long. Of course, the problem is it makes it much more difficult for the pilots to land the helicopters, so they've got to come up on an angle on a moving ship. So after 2 years of service, they changed the helipad markings so the helicopters would just approach over the stern. And if the helicopter was large, it would just it would position itself over the circle and make a pedal turn to just rotate so it would fit diagonally. But what I point out here is there are lights to tell the pilot the direction to follow. And here in the photograph in the center, you can see one of the diagonal lights is still there. In fact, all the diagonal lights are on the ship. So we have, if you look on the helipad, you can see a line of lights going lengthwise along the ship and line of lights going diagonally, because they never removed the lights for the diagonal approach over the stern. So those lights are still there, and you can go and take a look and notice them. Here's another little aviation modification. For the New Jersey's final cruise, it was equipped with a detail carrying Pioneer drones. Now I've cheated a little bit because this is an area that you can't really get to on the tour, but you can see this from places on the tour. And what this is a trolley that held a bladder tank for 100 LL gasoline that was used by Pioneer drones. The ship's fuel system had been converted in the 1960s to use JP5 JP5 jet fuel that would not work in the piston-powered Pioneer remotely piloted vehicles. So they had to add a different tank, and because the remotely piloted vehicles didn't use that much fuel, a small it's fairly large bladder tank would fit into that trolley, and and was sufficient for quite a lot of Pioneer usage. This particular tub is at the stern. It was converted to as a refueling point in the 1960s for aircraft, because the original aircraft refueling position was covered up by the helipad. But what the detail here to point out is the track is inclined, and in the picture at the left you can see there's a little cable that if you pull the cable, it'll throw the tank will just go overboard. So in theory, if there were a fire or a problem, you could just pull the cable and the tank would go overboard. You can see now that there are chains in place to prevent that from happening. But if you follow, excuse me a second, I lost my microphone. Right there. If you follow the cable up to the side, in front of the fire station, you can see this little lever, which is extending from the center of the picture to the right. That lever is what pulls the cable and would send the cart overboard. Don't recommend trying that. Here's another main deck detail. Now you can peek into some of the handling rooms for 5-inch magazines, and so right here is a picture in one of the 5-inch magazines. In the center is a hoist for ammunition. There are 2 hoists in each projectile room, and they're dredger hoists that operate like a conveyor belt. Each hoist, the ammunition for the 5-inch guns is semi-fixed, so that you have the shell, the projectile is one piece, and then the cartridge is another piece. You get a complete cartridge in brass containing the propellant and the primer. The cartridges were stored in canisters, and they remained in the canisters until they were actually sent up to the guns. And while each hoist could handle either projectiles or canisters, but generally in operation they would use one hoist for projectiles and one for canisters, but they were interchangeable which one would be used. Well, the detail here to point out is you see these two circular objects at the bottom. Those can be removed and create openings for scuttles for getting rid of the canisters once they're sent up to before they're sent up in the hoist to the gun. So they're called decanting scuttles, and they can come out absolutely anywhere. So on the right is a picture of a shower on second deck, and you see as a decanting scuttle that would drop canisters right into the shower. Normally when they were in operation, they put a canvas chute there to collect the canisters. But these decanting scuttles can be found in offices, in crew's quarters, anywhere. So if you look up in in New Jersey on the second deck or on main deck, there are a lot of places. There's a total of 20 of these that you can look up and see. Next little detail, this is moving down to the second deck, is you can go, the farthest you can go forward on the tour is the windlass room. And you can see in the windlass room, there's wheels for controlling the windlass. There's brake and a speed or a power wheel. And what you'll notice is these wheels have rods that go up vertically, and those are mechanically connected to the wheels you see on the main deck. So there are 4 wheels. So those wheels go down, and they're turning the same rods that you see on second deck. Simple. Another little second deck feature is most of second deck is armored. So wherever there's plumbing, you'll see these steps upwards, where these are for showers or any other place where there was plumbing. For some of the places for health reasons, and others for food preparation. And the reason for the step up is there's a false deck above the main deck where the plumbing runs. When they did this, rather than cutting lots of holes into the armor plate, the plumbing would run in a crawl space below the false deck on the second deck. Now another detail you find all over the second deck on the tour are trunks, armored trunks for communicating to the various points in the ship. So the very left is a trunk that's used to communicate with a 5-inch gun. There are thicker ones that communicate with directors. But what I point out here is if you look up, from the right is a transverse trunk. So if you see these trunks, they follow a zigzag path in order to keep projectiles from being able to go straight down through them. And so if you follow some of the trunks, you'll see that they will go sideways as well and run along the overhead. Dirty things. Here's another view outside the post office on second deck. And if you notice on the right, the bulkhead is sloped. And the reason for that is that's the air intake for the boiler. And the air intakes are staggered, so that, again, pardon me. The air intakes are staggered so that an incoming projectile or bomb couldn't go straight through two armored grates. It's not, the air intakes have armor grates, so they're not completely open, but they're staggered, and so this bulkhead is sloped so that the air intake is offset from second deck to third deck. Now here, we're actually in the room where we are right now. If you go around, you can see that there's right here in the mess, there's a hatch just sitting out in the middle of nowhere that appears to do nothing. There are no knot ladders around it. But again, if you look up, a lot of directions here to look up, there's a hatch directly above it. So this is a hatch for loading supplies. You can erect a davit above the hatch on main deck and lower all the supplies down. And aft of here, many people I think just walk by this piece of machinery. This is the aft mooring windlass. So this motor would just spin. When it was on, it would just spin. And above on main deck, you can see here on the inset picture, in front of the structure, there's a windlass that you could, when this was spinning, you could wrap ropes around it, and when you tighten the rope, the spinning of the engine would cause the rope to be tightened, so there'd be sufficient force to pull the ship towards a dock or pier. Here's one I think people will overlook, and this is the start of the mess line on the starboard side. It's identical on the left side. This is an air intake for the emergency diesel generator room. But the detail to point out here is you can see it at the very bottom towards the deck, there's a little angled piece of metal. That's an armored grate. So it's a solid piece of metal, several inches thick, with lots of holes punched in it so that a projectile can't pass through, in theory, and it will allow air to flow through, but will not allow a projectile. And these can be found all over on second deck and main deck. Another one I think probably a lot of Battleship fans will notice, this is a step downward into the mess area from the serving line. This is where the end of the armored belt is. I'm sorry, not the armored belt, the armored deck, sorry. So this is 4.7 inches of armor is stacked on top of the 1 1/4 inch deck here. Goes down. What's a little bit unusual is that the deck armor continues below on third deck, but the armor on third deck is flush with the rest of the deck, so you can't visually tell where the armor stops. But I suspect that a lot of people go down this step and never realize what the significance of it is. And here's a view. We're down to third deck, looking up forward, and this is in the X-ray room. The armor is held to on second deck is held to the rest of the deck using what's they called quilting pins, and these are you can see them here. The large pins, the ones that are not going in zigzags, the ones that are in straight lines here. They're basically like rivets, except is that they're welded on the top. So we drill a hole through the deck and up through the armor, and then they would weld the top end and grind it flush. So in theory it's like a rivet, but normally a rivet would be either pounded while soft heated to the soft point, or it would be just used by force to make the rivet expand. The other thing on why they're called quilting pins is that they extend through the middle of the plate. So wherever on the ship they have these type of pins that are not running around the edges but also go through the middle of the plate, they call them quilting pins. This is one of the few places where you can actually see them from the bottom on the tour because most of the armor, most of the deck armor, there's another layer called the Splinter Deck that runs below this and obscures it. And in theory, the Splinter Deck would catch fragments that would flow down. So if you look here, if a projectile were to hit the deck, it would be possible for the heads to pop off and go into the medical spaces. But most in the machinery areas, there's additional protection to prevent that. And so I've mentioned the Splinter Deck. Sorry here, lost mic again. Here's a picture that shows where you can kind of visualize what the Splinter Deck does. This is, if you go on the tour of the engine room, the boiler room, this is boiler room in boiler room 2 where the uptake goes. So as soon as you enter the boiler room, you look up, this is what you'll see. And what's happening here is that the lower area is the Splinter Deck, which is supposed to catch fragments that might come down from the main deck. But in order to allow the uptake, to allow the boiler exhaust, they've cut an opening, and so the uptake goes directly to the second deck, and they've created these angled facets to fill in the area around the Splinter Deck. Again, what's kind of the themes here is that there's a lot to see when you look up. And I'll give you another example of that. Here on third deck, this is outside the barbette for turret number 1. You can see there's a ladder that appears to go absolutely nowhere. But if you go and look under there, there's a valve that's critical for damage control. And if you look, there are quite a number of these ladders to nowhere that are found all over the ship. And if you go and you look up, you're probably going to find a valve or some fixture fixture like to allow machinery hooked up to move machinery. But these are all over. Again, look up. Next, we'll move to the superstructure. And here it's the captain's cabin. And I point this out, what I brought this out for is to show the ammunition trunk. This appeared in a recent YouTube video here. But this was originally an ammunition trunk. It started at second deck and went up through the captain's cabin. And it has been since repurposed to use wiring. And if you're on the tour, you can see this on several of the decks. You can't see it at main deck, but here the 01, 02, 03, you can actually follow this trunk up. And when you get to 05, behind to the right, I have here is a picture of where one of the CWIS mountings is. You can see a cabinet for ammunition at the right of the left picture. And in the right picture, the inset is the end of that trunk. And that area was originally a handling room for 40 millimeter ammunition, but was also later converted to as a space for controlling CWIS 20 millimeter guns during the 80s. And presumably that trunk was used to run wiring for the Phalanx CWIS system. Now here's a little grim one. Move down to the O2 level here. This is in the CEC. These are consoles for controlling the Tomahawk missiles. And here in the inset to the right is a close-up of that. And you can see there's a key to enable nuclear weapons. We don't know if New Jersey ever carried nuclear weapons. It's probably unlikely, but the plans clearly were set up to handle Tomahawk missiles that were equipped with nuclear weapons. And so you can see this little grim reminder of the Cold War if you look closely at the console. And here we're moving extremely far aft to the second deck. You see this little odd structure. This is next to the helicopter control above the of turret number 3. This is the visual glide slope for helicopters. And the reason for the accordion pleats is that this is gyro stabilized pitch and roll. And as a helicopter approached the ship from the stern, they would see green on that, in the center indicator would appear green if it were high, yellow if it were orange were on the correct approach path, and red if it were too low. And the two lights at the either side are blinking lights for the controller to turn on if we wanted the helicopter to abort the approach. Little things there. Again, looking at details here for the ship. This is the conning tower at the 04 level where the ship was, where the ship's wheel is. And what I would point out here is that the conning tower is actually composed of segments, like 5 segments, goes around. The shape of the conning tower is 4 arcs that are that roughly form an ellipse, but the plans actually call for them the arcs. But what you can see here in this doorway, above and below the door, are weld seams. So this is where the segments are welded together. And if you look closely, you can't look closely inside the door opening. You can see outlines of a hourglass-shaped key that has been wedged in to the gap to hold the two pieces together. It's not really visible in photographs, but if you're on the New Jersey and you go up to the door, you can see the faint outlines of the key that was hammered in to the joint to hold the pieces together. We're jumping all over here, but this is one of my favorite photographs that is actually in the book. It was taken from on top of a 16-inch gun looking aft. And the detail I wanted to point out here is the little handle that's on the left side. And that handle is the ready switch for the gun captain. So it snaps back. It's spring loaded. So it has 2 positions, aft and forward. And by a spring, it automatically goes to the aft position. But the significance to point out for people here of what that switch does is the gun's electronics know 2 positions. It knows the position that the gun is aimed at for elevation, and it knows the 5-degree loading angle. Those 2 are locked into the system. So when the gun captain pushes the lever forward, it locks, and then the gun automatically goes to its aimed position. When the gun fires, there's a electromagnet that releases it. That causes the switch to spring backwards, and then the gun moves to the 5-degree loading position. So this switch, while it has the additional function of notifying the gun captain that the gun is ready, it also has the function of telling whether the gun should be at its aimed elevation or at its loading elevation. So when you see the gun fire, people always say after the gun fires, the gun suddenly lowers, and that's being controlled by this switch here. Here's another little, actually a couple of odd turret details of the type we look at. On the floor is a wrench. I should say on the floor, on the deck plating, there's a wrench here. That wrench is over a pin that holds the turret in place. when it's in forward position. The turret is traversed using worm gear, so it won't move on its own, but that pin relieves any stress on the machinery. So if something forces the turret to turn, some wave action motion of the ship, that force will get transmitted to that pin, which then goes into the barbette and won't then get transmitted to the machinery. Now, sometimes you'll see pictures in heavy seas on the Iowa-class battleships. They turn the turrets to the side in an effort to keep water out, and in those conditions, they're basically allowing the force to get transmitted to the machinery. But but normally these pins held the turret forward, and there's a similar pin on each gun that holds it at the zero degree position. And there are two of these pins, one on each side of the turret. This area is accessible on turret 1 to visitors. This particular picture is on turret 3. The other detail to look at are these things that look like hats that are welded to the bulkhead. So what's going on here is that the bulkhead here is a structural backing bulkhead. It is not the armor plate of the turret. The side armor is outside of this, and it is then bolted to this backing plate. And then the gap was filled with cement. When the bolts here then have covers welded over them, so if a projectile struck the armor and caused the bolt to break off, it wouldn't go flying around, but it would get caught by by these covers. And the effect of the cement is to spread any impact across the entire bulkhead rather than just against these bolts. And so these can be seen throughout the turret, and they also occur in other areas of the ship, but generally they're off the tour. If you take the turret tour, you'll learn that the inner ring of the storage, where the projectiles are stored, also rotates, and this is another pin that keeps it from rotating, just like the ones in the turret. So I said in the turret you have one for each of the projectile storage rings. There are two for the turret itself, and there's one for each gun. So another structural detail from the turrets here, and this is something that occurs throughout the ship, is our zigzag butt strips used for welding. So on the right side, we again have the backing bulkhead for the turret, which is not the armor, but on the left side is the armor plate for the back. Normally, this face-hardened armor cannot be welded, but here the plate is thick enough that it could be welded on the inside. And they use this construct of zigzag strips. It's kind of an offshoot of how you would do it if you were riveting. And the zigzags were intended to give additional weld surface. And again, you'll see these zigzagged weld seams all over the ship because they didn't really trust welding, as it was a new thing to ship construction at the time. And here's another little detail from the turrets. Now this you would see if you took the turret 2 tour and actually looked into the hoist. And what's going on here is the hoists hold 5 projectiles. So if you start at the projectile level, there's positions for 5 projectiles within the hoist. And in the projectile hoist, there are these pawls. On one side they have fixed pawls, and one side they have moving pawls. The one on here, these are both moving pawls. One is showing here the deck, and one is actually in the pawl carrier at the right. And when the hoist is operated, it raises a piston, and the piston raises this pawl carrier, which pushes the projectile up to the next level, and then it's caught by a fixed pawl. The projectile hoist operator then lowers the piston, and so these pawls just snap back in as they move down past the projectile. They move another projectile in, and then the piston again moves the projectile up to the next storage position. So you get a ratchet action to raise the projectiles. And so this, if you look closely, you can actually see these pawls. And this is my final little detail we'll take on all over the ship. This is in the 5-inch guns. And note, and I'm pointing out here to the left is to the right, we're in the center here. We're on the right side of the turret. This is the trainer's position where the turret is traversed. But my reason here for the odd detail is this handle on the right side. Because when the 5-inch guns are, the Navy called them semi-automatic, which meant some of the functions of the gun were done automatically. It's not like a semi-automatic rifle. So when you put a projectile in the tray for loading it, you would hit a lever, and a spring would push spring-loaded would push the projectile into the barrel, and the breech block would automatically close. But this lever is the cocking lever, so that you can get the first projectile in. And so when you're starting to operate the gun, on each gun you would pull this lever, which would then open the breech lock and push the rammer all the way to its rear position. So those are the details. I just want to briefly return to the book. The book actually covers the entire ship. We've gone everywhere, and this is a photograph from the bottom of the chain locker looking up to the chain. It's the kind of thing that that's in the book that you can't see on the tour, and most of the book is devoted to things that are not visible on the tour, like this. One other thing, Volume 2 is in the works, and Volume 2 will be on the armor. So this one will have fewer pictures and more diagrams and more 3D illustrations. And I'm now looking at maybe 4 or 5 volumes to finish all this. So I'll open up. Any questions?
You want to stand, and I'll actually get you in this shot.
All right. Oops,
Okay.
well,
Any questions from the audience before I ask questions from the internet?
yes.
How many years in the making of this book?
Well, that depends on how you count. It's 20 years if you start from the beginning of the research. I'm going to say realistically 4 years, and more of putting it together. In the way it would happen, just to say the writing, is because there was so much material, I would start writing, as I collected material, I'd start writing on one section, I'd start writing on another section, and so there were huge amounts written on other parts of the book coming, and then I was writing what would be called this book as well, and then at some point I realized this section had gotten so huge it had to be a book on its own.
Well, good job.
Thanks.
Can you talk a little bit about how many different blueprints you've gone through and how they fit together in your 3D image?
Oh, God. I think we've collected of the ones that I've actually collected, about 7,000. The ones that I've actually gone through, it's probably about 20,000. One of the things people may not realize about the blueprints is that there are blueprints that are interesting, and there are blueprints that aren't interesting. And most of the unfortunately, most of the blueprints are not that interesting. So what I think they do is they would take a junior draftsman and say, draw a picture of a nut, or draw a picture of a coat hanger. And there are literally, there are blueprints for nuts and bolts of all sizes, and there is even a coat hanger blueprint in the collection here. There. But I said my own collection of ones that I've actually saved is about 7,000 at this point.
And that's blueprints from Battleship New Jersey's collection and what other places?
Battleship New Jersey and the National Archives. And maybe we should tell the sad story here, okay? The blueprint story is a sad one because it appears that no original blueprints for the ship have survived. Not when I say original blueprint, original drawings, because originally the draftsman drew pictures. They weren't blueprints. They drew on black and white. And then the blueprint process is a chemical, sort of photographic process for making copies. The blueprints, the original for BB-34 through BB-66 were transferred to the Naval Historical Warehouse in Memphis, Tennessee, that closed shortly after 2000. We don't know, I'm not sure the exact time, it was closed after 2000. And it appears that all the original drawings for all those ships were just simply destroyed. We haven't confirmed, but that's what appears to have happened. There is one complete set of blueprints, of actual blueprint copies that was used for the ships for their modernization in the 30s, pardon me, in the 1980s, was sent to the Philadelphia Navy Yard from the Long Beach Navy Yard, and then they're sitting now on USS Charleston with all the remaining spare parts for the Iowa class, and USS Charleston is scheduled to be scrapped. So unless someone gets all this stuff off of USS Charleston before it goes to the fiery furnace, all the spare parts for the Iowa class and all the blueprints remaining for the Iowa class are going to go into the fiery furnace as well. Yes?
I've seen some of your videos where you go to, like, you got one of those stretchers from John F. Kennedy, right? Can't you go there to USS Charleston and pick up said blueprints, or is that still owned by the Navy?
The Navy has opened Charleston.
Go stand at his microphone to do it. I'm sorry, life is hard. I need you to stand next to him. For the internet.
The Navy has opened Charleston on 2 separate occasions for museum ships to strip parts off of, but there is so much there, and it's so big that we haven't been able to recover a fraction of it. The most recent time they opened the ship up, we only got about a day and a half on board. However, part of the process was we were allowed to mark boxes of things that we thought we wanted. And when the ship is towed to the scrappers, likely one of the yards in Brownsville, Texas, they are supposed to call us based on those stickers and say, hey, you can come down and pick up this stuff. We'll see if that happens and how well that happens. The scrappers obviously have no use of blueprints. There's no money in that. So hopefully we got stickers on all those boxes and they will call us for it.
Well, I hope you actually guys get those.
Thank you.
I forgot to mention the other piece of blueprints. There are some in the National Archives that, when I say some, it's like a handful. In fact, I think there's one blueprint at National Archives of the conning tower. I mean, this is one that basically extends from one wall to the next, one bulkhead to the other bulkhead here. I got to speak Navy here. One bulkhead to another if you unthrow it out. But I believe it's the only actual original blueprint that I've been able to find there. And they have a few design concepts, and they have lots of booklets of general plans. The other thing they have is microfilm of the plans. However, the person who did the microfilm was apparently high on LDS at the time, and sorry, I keep on losing your microphone. I'm sorry here. Technical problem here. Okay, we're back. So, two problems you get with microfilm. One, Some of them are just completely black, absolutely, utterly unreadable. Some are barely readable. Others just didn't get copied at all, and some are actually readable. Okay? So some are clearly readable. So you get those three different gradations. So the clearly readable ones are good. The barely readable, sometimes you can figure it out. I mean, frequently you'll see things like if it's a 3 and a 5 tend to look a lot like in many of these blueprints. But if you try to reconstruct the computer, you can sometimes very frequently figure out what 3 to 5 is. And sometimes by looking at a microfilm, Okay. Sometimes by looking at a microfilm, like you could, so they are originally to scale, you can kind of measure things by pixels and determine whether it's a 3 or a 5, something a 3 or a 5, or a 7 or a 1. Right. That's the sad state. It's not like the British where they have all these nicely archived blueprints.
Question from the internet. You showed a diagram with the armor on the bow, I think?
That was the bow plating.
Bow plating. They want to know, are there parts of it that are thicker than others? Where are the thick parts on it?
Oh. Go there. That's it. Oh, but they can't see this.
They kind of can. I think so. If you step back, I think I can make it work.
Okay, let me go. I've got to go all the way to the front here. Okay. The answer is 1, they're different thicknesses. 2, they're actually different metals. Okay. Do I have enough here that I can actually? I can't read. The plates, they are quite a very large number of thicknesses. We can't really read. If this diagram in my original, I can blow it up. I have indicated what the thickness of every plate is and what the type is. The types are they're medium steel, high tensile steel, and special treatment steel. They're 3 types. This creates the problem that you have 3 different metals. It's a natural battery, which encourages rust. That's not a good thing about this. It's a patchwork of thicknesses. They call it 17 pounds. They're 40 pounds per inch. I think 17 pounds is the thinnest. At the sides, it gets over. Oh.
I'm sorry.
At the sides, the armor is looking at me.
It's fine.
Can they see?
Yep.
At the sides, it gets thicker. Where the armor belt is thicker. One of the things we did, the Navy only counts armor. Only counted something as armor if it is at least 4 inches, 4 inches or higher. But the Navy in this literally used armor plates thinner all over the ship. It's very expensive, but they did it. The Iowa class. I was thinking about talking about this being the topic, but I decided it might be getting too technical. The Iowa class were the Rolls Royces of ships. These were handcrafted wonders, and so no expense was spared. So yes, there are a lot. I don't know if that's the question. Yes, there are a lot of different thicknesses, a lot of different 3 different types, and towards the stern there's actually one place where the plates are doubled using these quilting pins that I talked about out there.
Is there one thing you came across in all of your sort of exploring of the ship? Like, they just don't make them like they used to.
Lots of things like that. There are so many things that things they don't make them like they used to. You can just look up and see the riveting. These ships were the last of the era. I mean, last of an era. You have to remember that these battleships taxed the capabilities of U.S. industry to build. Okay? That even if two more Iowa class were under construction towards the end of the war, if the United States had actually devoted full effort to it, they could have finished those two by the end of the war. They couldn't have finished two more. That was, basically the limits of the shipbuilding capacity. When I go through, I'm amazed. I think one of the things I'm amazed about is how they've machined joints into armor plate. And so if you look at the various armor plates in the ship, it's like they put like the woodworking by Norm Abram, except done into 12, 11-inch thick steel. So I think that's probably the one that's probably been the most amazing to me, is the machining of metal and how much effort went into it. So we're all finished? No?
Are these available on the website?
Well, which one?
So we have copies of this book that are going to be available on the ship's website. There will be a link for that in the description down below. So be sure to check that out. No guarantee if you order today that they will get to you before Christmas, just because of how things are, but we will do our best to get it to you as soon as we can. Thank you guys for watching.